Hi, I'm Jonny, not James Bond. And even though we're in Office 007, we don't have a license to kill, thankfully. Although that doesn't mean we don't have a license to thrill, entertain, or even educate. And that's the best license, especially for podcasting. Money Matters is a podcast brought to you by me and by Money Support Group. And it looks at financial hardship and personal hardship, as well as ways to counteract those difficult life moments. If you want to find out a bit more about Money Support Group, then there should be a little bit of information in the description and maybe a link to a website that you can click on. As far as I'm concerned, leading this podcast, I'd love you to like, comment and subscribe. It would mean a lot to me, and also Money Support Group and the team that supports me with Money Matters. Hello, I'm Jonny once again, talking to you about all things financial, and I'm delighted to be joined by James from The Big Step. Hello, James. Nice to be talking with you today.
Hi, Jonny. Pleasure to be here. Looking forward to talking about some important stuff.
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to the previous interview and now you listen to this one, I might sound a little bit different. That's because I've got some orthodontic work in place. So I'm going to let James talk even more than I would usually, because it's just nice to give my vocal cords a little rest. But James, introduced you briefly there. You're from The Big Step. But for those who don't know who you are or what The Big Step is, how would you describe it to the newcomers?
Yeah, so I'm James. I'm 31 years old. I'm a recovering gambling addict. I had a gambling addiction for the best part of 12 years. I started gambling as a child. When I was 16, I placed my first bet at my local bookmakers, initially drawn in by the massive adverts on outside the bookies and all the advertisement within sport. I grew up in what we could say is the Ray Winston era, where gambling has been completely normalized and it's seen as this legitimate leisure activity that everybody does, and it's completely harmless. And as a child, I didn't understand any of the risks involved, and I didn't understand it could turn into an addiction. Didn't understand that certain products have addictive addiction rates of up to 50%, and it soon escalated for me. I started with small casual football bets, but very quickly I was going to the bookies by myself, and I was hiding when I got to the bookies and playing the fixed odds betting terminals, which are roulette and blackjack machines on the high street. And I was in I was in debt by the time I was 18. When I went to university, I spent pretty much all of that online gambling, and online gambling just opened a whole new world of opportunities for me to get that fix, which was what my addicted brain was telling me to do wherever possible. And as drastic as it sounds, it completely destroyed pretty much every part of my life. When I was a youngster, I had a list of things that I wanted to achieve before I was 30, and I think gambling literally and metaphorically ripped all those things away from me. It really did destroy those areas of my life, and I don't take for granted now that I've stopped. It's been 3 years since my last gamble, but it came from a real bad place. I couldn't imagine a life with gambling anymore, and I couldn't imagine a life without it. And I know there's so many more people out there still struggling today, and of course there's up to 650 gambling related suicides every year in this country. So I never lose sight of that. I don't take it for granted. And in terms of The Big Step, what I do now, during my recovery, quite quickly I realized that I couldn't watch football without a bet on. I was really struggling in those first few months. And soon after that, I was finding it very hard to resist the adverts. The adverts were telling you to bet in play now, and it matters more when there's money on it. And when you're trying to recover from an addiction, it's just very, very difficult. And I soon started to realize that actually, looking back, a lot of the reason this happened to me was because of this really close relationship between gambling and football. It wasn't just my way in. It made it very difficult for me to try and stop, because it just felt like football was constantly pushing me and reminding me and urging me to bet when I shouldn't have been. And so then that's when I came up with the idea of walking to football clubs that have gambling shirt sponsorships. And initially that was going to be called Rambling for Safer Gambling, but soon got talked out of that, and it is now the big step. And we've hosted 4 events. We've got a petition, and our main campaign aim is to end all gambling advertising, sponsorship, and promotion associated with football, because that young James should never have been introduced to gambling at 16, and it's still happening today. It's not improved in 16 years since I started gambling. And if anything, it's worse. So we're going to keep banging the drum, because we're up against a 14 billion pound industry that is very close to football, but we know that harm's happening on a daily basis, and we're trying to prevent it.
That was really well put, James, actually. Very powerful story from yourself personally, and I think it's really good. Like I said, to Mick on Mick the pastor on a previous episode, he was a recovering drug addict. It's really good how you can take those moments of adversity, turn it on its head, and then build something to help prevent other people from falling into that situation, or to challenge, as you say, real harms that affect a lot of people. So massive respect to you for doing that already. I think I can say that in this interview. And you touched on actually the effects gambling have on younger people. Gambling can have on younger people, and it's a bit different now for younger people in terms of the technology and in terms of games coming out and things. And I know, because I'm a huge football fan as well, I also can relate to the face of gambling in a lot of football's activities. In particular, a hidden form of gambling, which I've noted to you in these questions, is FIFA. FIFA, wide-selling game across the globe, has a loot box system. Probably the most popular loot box system across the gaming industry, video game industry. And kids as young as 9, 10, 11 are so desperate to get these top-end players, Messi, Ronaldo, etc., that they pile money into this unfairly rigged pack system to try and get these superstars, when in actual fact the odds of getting these are 1 in 20,000. It's ridiculous, it's stacked against them. So I guess my question to you, James, is, do you think that the younger generation now are being pushed into the gambling stratosphere through games like FIFA that, I suppose, sugarcoat gambling in a friendly manner, when in actual fact it's really toxic to lots of young people and the little money that they have, I suppose?
Yeah, and I think it's not just pushing into it. I actually think you could use a stronger word, and I think it's grooming. I think it's grooming a generation of young football fans into becoming gamblers without any understanding of the risks involved. And I'm fortunate that FIFA and loot boxes within it weren't around when I was a young person, because I would have been definitely involved in something like that. I know it's not similar, but the excitement you used to get from opening a packet of stickers for a sticker book, it's very similar to that. And the cynic in me thinks that a lot of it is deliberate, because they know that it's a profit making initiative, as you say. But actually what it does is it reinforces that psychological element to gambling from a really young age. So it's that reward system. So when you are waiting to see whether you've got Lionel Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo, that does something to your brain. Eventually, that waiting for that excitement, that anticipation, rewires your brain so that you want that again and again, and eventually you want it every day, and eventually you want it every second, like I did. And that's not sustainable. Eventually, that's how addiction causes. And this is what's happening in FIFA. But it's not just loot boxes in FIFA. Of course, because FIFA shows all of the teams, whilst they're actually gambling, in my opinion, through loot boxes, they're actually being exposed to gambling advertisement in the game. Now, FIFA is a game that could be played by children aged 3+, and they've got 10 Premier League clubs with gambling sponsors on their shirt. So they're on the end of this relationship between gambling and football wherever they look, in video games, in sticker books, when they watch matches, and that's why we're calling it to stop. But yeah, the loot box issue is big, and I know that there's been a recent consultation where we're hoping that the government will regulate it as gambling, and therefore it wouldn't be available in any game for children under the age of 18, which is what they've done in Belgium, I believe. So I'm hoping that's where we go in this country too.
Yeah, I was just going to note the Belgium example. Actually, yeah, it's completely not a thing. It's just FIFA without the loot boxes, which I completely agree with you. Is certainly the foundations of a better and less, to quote you, I suppose, a grooming kind of experience for young children. So it's something I certainly like to see replicated, particularly in our country as well, and many other countries across the globe. So I probably already know the answer to this, James. It's something I also share a similar view on. But what are your thoughts on the slogan, when the fun stops, stop? Essentially, is it effective enough, or is it just something that now just gets said without a second thought on advertisements?
Well, I was watching TV the other day, and an advert for online slots popped up, and in the daytime, by the way, this was, and I realised this, when the fun stop message actually appears for less than half a second at the end of the advertisement. So even if it was effective, you don't actually have time to even take it in. It's absolutely farcical. And for people like me and the many people that struggle with gambling knows, when you are addicted, or even if when you're at risk of being addicted and you're playing these products are designed so it bypasses the part of your brain which allows you to stay in control, or to set limits, or to stop when the fun stops. So these gambling companies know that these messages do nothing, and they've proven to do nothing to reduce harm or to prevent harm. And actually, there's research to say that these messages cause harm, because what actually happens is, when you can't set limits, stay in control, or stop when the fun stops, you think you're a flawed individual and it's just you that has this problem and I can't control myself. And that's eventually leads to, well, what's the point in anything if I can't control myself on this? And the next step to that is suicide. And that's a drastic thing to say, but this safer, responsible gambling narrative is contributing towards young people taking their own life, because they own all of the guilt, they own all of the shame, they think it's just them with the problem, when actually we know these products are designed to bypass the part of your brain which allows for that responsibility, so to speak. So short answer, that was a long answer, but the short answer is they are not effective, and I think they should be replaced by public health messaging, which are more severe, talk about the actual risks of all forms of gambling, and take into a public health approach, which would be determining the cause of the harm, which ultimately is the product.
No, yeah, well put. When you say that, actually, I think of what's been on for a few years, the smoking adverts and the and such, what are quite grotesque in imagery and so on.
Yeah.
Really stand out. I also think there was also an advert on the train track where someone was just playing on a train track and suddenly, bam, gone. It was so unexpected and quite dysphomistic, if you will. Much more effective, I think, like you were sort of alluding to there, than the little slogan at the end of a happily toned advert where you don't really pay attention to that. I think something that's quite forceful, obvious, quite brutal in many ways is something that's going to stand out far more in that regard.
And those approaches have worked as well.
Yeah.
They've reduced smoking rates. The amount of people that die in train-based accidents has reduced as well. So it does work. We can learn from tobacco. Tobacco is probably the most comparable thing because it's an addictive product. It was completely normalized and glamorized in this country, and especially through sport, like gambling is now. So there are a lot of parallels there. And it's not just about taking the adverts off and having the pictures of bad lungs and stuff that does it. Obviously it has to go over a whole host of measures, but that messaging is crucial, as you say. That would be one of my first asks in this Gambling Act review.
Oh, yeah, that's very fair, and brings us on quite nicely to my next question, which is what do you think that the government and regulators can do more to prevent gambling addictions across the board?
Yeah, that is a good question. And if I had 5 hours, I'd probably just about be finished. But I mean, our initial ask for this review through the big step was obviously to end gambling advertising, sponsorship, and promotion in football. However, more broadly, we believe we want to return to a point where gambling is tolerated in society, but not promoted at all, because it's a dangerous product, doesn't need to be promoted. Alongside all that, I talked about the public health messaging, but we need to make the product safer, and the product in its entirety is online gambling. How you make that safer? You have affordability checks at the start of a customer journey. Don't like using that word, but that's what they use. You make the product slower. At the moment, you can spin every 2.5 seconds, and you make the stake size lower. At the moment, you can spin up to £500 every 2.5 seconds. So I can't do quick maths, but imagine what that is in an hour's worth of playing a slot machine. It's a lot of money. So slowing the games down, affordability checks, stake limits, alongside the advertising restrictions, they'd be the big ones for me, but also making sure that the industry pays its fair share towards research, education, and treatment. At the moment, it's voluntary, and some companies pay up to £10 a year from making millions, which is just an insult to those of us harmed. But we need a mandatory levy of 1%, which is what would be equivalent to around £150 million guaranteed every year to fund independent education, research, and treatment. In terms of what debt services like yourselves could do, I think it would be an acknowledgement of the gambling addiction and the harms caused by gambling are not solely financial, and actually a lot of the reason why the severe cases like suicide happen is not always related to money and debt. Actually, it's the mental health harms. Now, obviously, debt then comes with new mental health harms as well. But it would just be maybe understanding that gambling addiction is not all about the money. Unfortunately, it's like the sharp end of it. It's the most practical example of what goes wrong, but it's everything behind the scenes that eventually causes those suicidal thoughts, and sadly, some people taking their own life.
Yeah, mental health is one of the biggest silent killers, I think, anywhere in the world. And I suppose one thing, as far as that's concerned, is it's nice that in this era we are talking about that a little bit more, even if we're not necessarily talking about the real problems of gambling as much. And I'm glad you touched on the financial services there, what we could do as debt advisors, because that was going to be my next question. So that was nicely covered there. I guess keeping it to debt then, just to keep it on that sort of angle, would you say from your experience that debt is something that gambling is something that puts people into debt, or something that makes existing debts worse?
I think the answer is it does both. For me, I was in debt from the age of about 17, I think, for 12 years, constantly in debt. And towards the end of my addiction, I had up to 20 payday loans. I had guarantor loans, which unfortunately my mum was the guarantor. And, that's what happens when you're a gambling addict. You just use anyone and anything to be able to get the fuel to get that buzz. But yeah, I do think that gambling is unique in that sense, because the debts from gambling can happen so quickly. They can happen in a matter of seconds. You could be absolutely fine financially, and within an hour, you could, and I'm not exaggerating, you could lose the equivalent to what a car's worth, or in an afternoon, you could lose equivalent to what a house is worth. And for that to happen so quickly, and then all of a sudden have the pressures of that debt, can feel very overwhelming. But I suppose to be quite hopeful is I finished with tens of £1,000s worth of debt 3 years ago, and the minute I started being honest and open with like family and friends that I owed money to, there wasn't, they weren't sending the bailiffs around, put it like that. And actually the companies, the payday loans companies, the loans companies, once you explain to them that ultimately they shouldn't have lent me this money. I couldn't afford to borrow £6,000 at the time when I borrowed it, because I wasn't earning that much, but they didn't do the due diligence. So they just want regular contact. And I think when you explain as best you can what an addiction is, what it does to you mentally, and that their responsibility wasn't there and they failed in a way, I think that they are actually quite willing to just engage with, you know, smaller amounts. I'm not ashamed to say I still pay back some of mine, and I pay about £5 a month back, and I think that's fine. Like, I don't want to do anything that's going to put me out of pocket, and as long as I keep that regular engagement, they seem to be okay with that.
Oh yeah, really, really well put. And I mean, the whole payday loan issue is another topic, I suppose, in itself, in terms of what they do and how they operate. We could have another interview on that, but I'll probably save that for another time. A lot of things going on there. I think, yeah, I mean, one question that was posed to me actually just before going on about, which actually, no, it wasn't. It was posed a few days ago. Actually, was the ban on credit cards on gambling. How effective do you think that has been in reducing the level of gambling online, or has it not really done that much?
No, it's a really welcome measure, actually. I think it's probably the most well, it's hard to measure the effectiveness of it because it was only introduced last year, I believe. So it is hard to measure it at this stage, but it feels like for the first time a real acceptance by everybody involved, the regulator, the companies, and the banks, that gambling on credit, by its nature, shouldn't be allowed. You shouldn't be allowed to gamble money that isn't yours. That should be a fundamental principle running through all forms of gambling regulation. And actually, I think we are now seeing that. And only anecdotally, I know a lot of people that all of their gambling was done on credit cards, spending millions, and I think it would have saved them that harm that they caused themselves, and also would have sadly sometimes saved lives as well. So I do think it's a really positive step in preventing gambling harm.
And also, I think you touched on it there, I suppose, the symbol of it. The symbol, yes, we acknowledge there is a problem. Yes, we acknowledge that a lot of people are spending what they shouldn't be spending, i.e. on credit cards. We're doing that. Before you even put into consider the amount that's, you know, the amount of lives, the amount of livelihoods that have been saved as a result of this, the symbol itself is very powerful, I think, in that regard. I guess then, just to bring it back to football, because of course that's what the big step's based around. Would you say then that football's relationship with gambling companies is you know, a bit almost too far gone? Is it an insidious kind of relationship where it seems as though, largely for monetary purposes, that they are so reliant on one another? Is it a case that realistically it's going to be very, very difficult for football to untangle itself from this sort of parasitic web?
Yeah, I'm quite dishearteningly, I think the answer is yes, it will be difficult, but it doesn't mean it's impossible, and it doesn't mean it should be impossible. I would describe the relationship between gambling and football and toxic. For those that don't know, the current situation is there's only 2 Premier League clubs that don't have an official gambling sponsor or partner. The whole of the Football League is named after a gambling company. And you've got a situation where that level of brand exposure results in, when you watch Match of the Day, up to 89% of the time, a gambling brand is visible. So you could argue that saturation point has long gone. We're way past that point now. And it feels like no one's really doing anything about it. We've just become so normalized to seeing, you know, I was watching a Spurs game yesterday, and around the pitch there was an advertising hoarding that said William Hill, free bets, enhanced prices, exclusive offers. Bearing in mind there's supposed to be a whistle-to-whistle ban on gambling advertisement during football. Well, that's a gambling advertisement, so there is no whistle-to-whistle ban. So the companies are never going to be left to sort this out, because it's not in their interest to sort it out. They want to get more young football fans gambling. Football is never going to sort it out because football wants the money and is completely complicit in the harm that it's causing, and doesn't even want to engage most of the time. As long as the pounds are coming in through their bank account, they're happy, don't care where it comes from. And to be honest, government have done very little about it at all. There's currently a review going on, and it's rumoured that shirt sponsorship is something that will go. So they're talking of taking the gambling brands off the shirts. But our argument would be, if you're taking it off the shirt, what justification is it to be around the pitch? What justification is it to be on a website? What justification is it to be on social media? You can't click on a shirt, but you can click on a gambling site on social media. And clubs like Arsenal are promoting these at sometimes 9:30 a.m. in the morning, and they've got probably 1 million followers that are kids. So yeah, we need to protect the future generation of football fans, and I'm hoping government steps in and does something, because I have little faith in football doing it at this stage.
Yeah, I know, really well put. I mean, I'm a Burnley fan, and our new chairman, Alan Pace, who's come in, has actually, quite refreshingly, I think, spoken about dealing with the current gambling sponsorships at Burnley Football Club, so much so that a lot of the supporters were really happy with this, because some of them have felt that they would like to be disassociated with gambling companies in terms of sponsorships. And it's something Alan Pace has brought up and is certainly looking to think about in the coming season, which I think is a nice thing. And he's spoken about it on social media, and hopefully other clubs as well can do that more willingly, as opposed to being pushed into it. It'd be nice to see more willing chairmen discussing this, seeing the big issues of having lots of overexposure of gambling and doing something about it.
And ultimately, sorry to chip in
No,
there,
go on.
like it's not just about gambling harms and addiction.
No.
Who wants their football club to be sponsored by a company called
Sure.
LoveBet? It means
Sure.
the shirt looks horrible, and kids can't wear the same shirt as their parents. So forget
That's
gambling.
true. Yeah.
This is just something that should be sorted for everyday football fans.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I concur. Again, there's far nicer sponsors out there than certainly gambling companies. Even, no, really well put. I can't really add to that. And as well, like you say, it's a nice family day out. You would like matching kits. It's a shame that kids have to wear different sponsors or sponsorless shirts. Although I actually do quite like sponsorless shirts. I think they do look quite nice from time to time. Just a personal preference. In terms of the big step, James, last question. What do you want to achieve with the big step going forward? What are your short-term aims and long-term aims?
So immediate aims, our everyday aim is to see have a time where football is completely free of any form of gambling advertisement. It's estimated that 25% of the Premier League audience are young people. So for me, I just, this may sound arrogant, but I know that I'm right. I know that one day we'll look back and be like, why did we allow companies called LoveBet and DafferBet and Betway to be on the front of our football shirts? There will be a time when we do that. So it's just chipping away to get to that point. So more and more people start to open their eyes a bit and see how ridiculous this is. Longer term, gambling advertisement is not going to go away. There's going to be more areas wherever regulation comes, the industry uses it as an opportunity. So whilst we're trying to get it off the shirts, they'll be in their offices trying to think where else they can promote their product. So there'll always be a need for the campaign, but we will also and we do this already, we'll try to develop partnerships with football clubs to deliver independent education and awareness about gambling harms to their young fans and their communities.
No, yeah, really well put, James, and a nice little summary there. And I wish you all the best with your ambitions, with your aims, and hopefully, as you say, in 10, 20 years down the line, we can look and see a genuine progress with this movement, because it's something that affects a lot of people like yourself, and it would be good to see people stand up, acknowledge it, and to do something about it. So, really good chat, James, and thanks for talking to me. Thanks for talking to us.
Pleasure. Thank you, Jonny.